Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm AndyRC and today I'm going to be taking a look at the DarwinFPV Tiny Ape Freestyle. This is a 2.5 inch quadcopter, and DarwinFPV first came to my attention when they released the 3-inch version, which is the Baby Ape. And they did something that nobody else in the hobby was doing. At the time of release, this guy cost just $69, and I believe it's now $79, but where everybody else was increasing the prices to a crazy degree, they managed to keep the price down, which is just fantastic because the lower the price, it gets more people into the hobby. The prices are just out of control. It's a plug and fly model, so you do have to add your own receiver, and it did have a low quality camera. It had what looked like reused motors, but I guess that's how they got the price down. Very impressive. With the Tiny Ape, they've gone in a different direction. So first of all, we have got the Runcam Nano 4, so a very good camera, and we have got what looks like much more modern motors. You know, we've got the naked bottom, they are a 1103 8000 kV, and they are DarwinFPV branded. And the upgrades don't stop there, but at the making of this video, this guy is $129. So it's competing with the likes of the Emax Tiny Hawk Freestyle. Now, the Baby Ape came as a plug and fly, which means that you have to add your own receiver. What's interesting about this one is that it's got Express LRS built into the all-in-one flight controller and ESCs. Now, that doesn't mean that you are locked into ELRS if you buy this thing. I was actually talking to the developers earlier on Discord. You got any questions about ELRS, just go to the ELRS Discord. I'll put a link in the video description. They are just so helpful. So with the antenna for the Express LRS receiver, you can see it just connects there on the UFL connector. My worry was that, you know, as a kind of beginner, you may not have adopted to Express LRS. Even myself, I'm just getting on board with it now. Personally, I think they should have offered more options with this guy so that they could make it cheaper, like, you know, the Runcam Nano 4. It's a top tier camera, but, you know, that's their decision. They could have brought out a D8 version. But actually that doesn't make sense really when you find out that the VTX now has a power output up to 600 milliwatts, whereas this one 200 milliwatts. So combined with Express LRS and 600 milliwatts, this guy potentially a long-range analog micro. Now, if you like the look of this model and want to buy it, but you don't have the Express LRS hardware, first of all, get the Express LRS hardware. It's the future. They are not shipping it with a board that doesn't have Express LRS built in. But if for some reason you wanted to add a different receiver, my concern was that you wouldn't want this antenna if you were putting another receiver in there. And in order to get rid of the antenna, you have to disconnect this micro UFL connector here. And with Express LRS being a two-way communication, usually removing a receiver from a micro UFL isn't a problem if it's not in use. But if it's transmitting, then I was worried about the possibility of it either damaging the all-in-one board or at least the inbuilt SPI receiver. But I had a chin wag on Discord again with the Express LRS devs, and first of all they said, well, the telemetry that is coming back, it's only 17 milliwatts, but that sort of doesn't answer the question, and we sort of came to the conclusion that it's probably best that you go into Betaflight and switch the receiver type to whatever receiver it is that you are going to be using, and then disconnect the micro UFL, because if it's not active, then it's not transmitting. So that's the thing to do. But for me, it would be go Express LRS, because I'm absolutely buzzing about the technology. It's only getting better. One thing that has changed in the design are the arms of the frame. I'm never a big fan of gaps. Tend to find that they cause prop wash oscillations, so I'll be testing that later. Another thing about the frame, this with the props on, they are push-on props, and they are Gemfan propellers. They are the 2512 3-blade propeller, and you only get one set in the box. If you don't push these down far enough, then you might be able to see the prop actually goes underneath the top plate. So make sure that when you put the props on, and it's props in by the way, that they are properly pushed down, because if you haven't got them on properly, it'll fly. But of course, as we know, when we're flying, the props bend upwards and it could end up catching the plate on the top there. It's not going to do that if you push them all the way down. Same goes for the back as well. So a couple of other things. We have got a Perspex plate here so that the all-in-one board doesn't get damaged. When it comes to the all-in-one board, it's an F411 with 15 amp ESCs, and believe flashed with Blue Jay out of the box. The recommended battery size is up to a 450 milliamp hour 2S battery. So I've got one here, and we've got an XT30 connector. They also give you this really nice antenna straw as well, which you have to put on yourself. It sort of sits in this 3D printed part here. The only thing I'm not a fan of, the VTX antenna. It's a linear antenna, which is fine. Just make sure that your antenna game is up to scratch. So I'm using the Menace RC Bandicoot patch antenna along with Rapid Fire, and then the Invader antenna from Menace, just so that you get the diversity and all of the goodness. But you can see that it is really low down, so it's going to get blocked by the battery, and I think that could cause some range issues, especially when it is facing towards you when you are coming back and the battery is in place like that. So yeah, that's really my only criticism of that. You can actually buy it along with the Runcam thumb camera. Now, I'm not a fan of this camera. I didn't even review it, but that does send the price up. And this brings me on to sort of like another, it's not an issue, but if you're a beginner and an early adopter, I would still say ELRS, you are an early adopter. It's fantastic, it's the future for sure. But you can see here that these SPI receivers that are built into the flight controller, they come flashed with Express LRS version 1, and we are now on Express LRS version 2. And the difference between an SPI built-in receiver and a separate receiver is that it's firmware dependent. So in order to have Express LRS version 2 on the flight controller, you need Betaflight version 4.3, which hasn't been officially released yet, because the Express LRS version 2, it's built into Betaflight itself. So on the website, they say that they highly recommend that you run it with Express LRS version 1. The only problem is my Beta FPV module and everything I've upgraded to version 2. So what you can do at the making of this video, it's not going to age well. What you can do is you can flash the flight controller with release candidate. I used version 3, and they even on the website give you the CLI. You copy that, and once you have flashed to the specific version, so this is the target in Betaflight, you then apply the CLI. You'll get a few errors actually where it's, you know, some of the syntax has changed between release candidates, but I had no problems at all. So I would say go ahead and do that. They even have like a tutorial for pairing it because it's different if you have got a sort of like a bind phrase, but there's a website now that can convert your bind phrase. Personally, I'm not using binding phrases, but you know, that's just to make it easier for me, really. One thing that I don't think is mentioned in the DarwinFPV instructions to use the release candidates of Betaflight 4.3, and I think is really important, is that you actually have to have the release candidate of the Betaflight configurator 10.8.0 at the making of this video. So not only do you have to have a release candidate of Betaflight 4.3, you also have to have a release candidate of the configurator, otherwise it's not going to work. I initially could not get it to bind, and once again I turned to the Discord for Express LRS, and so what happened was I'm using the Radiomaster TX16S, and I flashed it with the latest version of OpenTX, which actually does support the 500 Hz refresh rate now. But I wasn't getting a bind with the receiver, even though I followed all of the instructions. And so I did a couple of things and I got a bind. The PID loop frequency is set to 4K, and the devs mentioned that a lot of these all-in-one boards, especially when they first came out with the built-in SPI receivers, you need to have them at 2K because the CPU load is too high. So I switched it down to 2K and got an instant bind. But then when I put it back up to 4K, everything was fine, running at 500 Hertz. So another thing that it might have been, I have my transmitter really close to the model, and I don't have the dynamic power setting turned on. So it's either the 2K thing, but I'm more thinking that the transmitter was too close, and because this is two-way communication, much like FR-Sky, if you were too close and tried to bind, then they would just interfere with each other. So anyways, that was my experience. If that helps you out, even with other models that have got these built-in SPI Express LRS receivers, that's what worked for me to get a bind. Let's check out the weight. the website says that it's 50.3 grams without batteries and paddles. Not sure what they mean by paddles. They mean propellers, maybe. So it is 54.7 grams without the battery, and with the 450 milliamp hour suggested 2S battery, it is 84.05 grams. So very light, very desirable model indeed. The only question really is, are you getting value for money? And the only model that I can think of to compare it to is the Tiny Hawk Freestyle. So if we take a look at the specs and also the price, get rid of the thumb camera. I wouldn't recommend the thumb camera, certainly not at the moment. I know they're improving it a lot. I wasn't happy with the image quality that I saw. $129, call it $130. We've mentioned some of the specs there, and if we go to the Tiny Hawk Freestyle, it's $139 off the bat, and it's only available with a D8 receiver, which has very poor range. If we come to the bottom, hopefully we'll get some specs. So yeah, I think the VTX only goes up to 200 milliwatt, and the motors 1103 7000 kV, so we are 8000 kV. Theoretically we should have more power with this guy, and not only that, it will actually take a 3S battery. Be careful with this though, because the default PID profile that they have come up with, it is just for a 2S battery. If you want to go 3S, select a different profile, you'll get Betaflight's default stock PIDs. It may fly okay on that. It definitely won't fly with the 2S PID, so be mindful of that. I personally think that it's gonna have plenty of power and punch and flight time on 2S anyways, but you've got that option, which don't think that you have on this one. We do have the 4-in-1 15 amp, the same, but oh, look at this PH2 connector. Yeah, they did that so you could reuse your Tiny Hawk batteries, but yeah, not good for current draw. There it is there. So of course we have got a XT30, which is much better for current draw and overall performance, battery life, flight time, the whole lot. So on paper I think that the Tiny Ape is a better choice than the Tiny Hawk 2 Freestyle. Of course, Emacs, they give these models to their pilots and they tune them, and you get a really good tune out of it, but they have done the same with this one as well, so we'll have to see what the tune is like. In the box you get the quadcopter, of course, and it's fitted with this strap which fits perfectly with the 450 milliamp hour 2S, but you are given a packet here, and that's a slightly longer strap. We've got the camera protector, bunch of screws, bunch of cable ties. I would have just loved an extra pair of propellers, but what can you do? You also get given, I think this is a schematic of the all-in-one board, so you know, if you want to do any modifications to that, then we have got the information all there. When it comes to the Betaflight setup, everything looked great. The only things that I changed were my modes just to suit my transmitter. I changed the on-screen display because I didn't like how they had placed certain items. I changed the low voltage warning to be lower because I predicted battery sag as I'm using really old batteries. It also came with their own rates as well as the PID tune, so it's not my usual rate, but it's actually pretty close, so I just left it. I also turned on the Lost Model beacon and Lost RX because it doesn't have a lost model alarm, and even though the sound is fairly quiet, it's loud enough to find it, believe me. And I'm going to be flying in long grass today, whichever field it is I end up flying at. I also turned off flip over after crash because I think these tiny models, if you don't want grass wrapped around the motor and then trying to flip it over, you're just going to burn out these tiny boards. Okay, let's go for a line of sight flight with this guy on the dullest day ever. It's actually not true. It's like this every day. In fact, usually much worse than this every day. So, running the 450 milliamp hour GMB 2S battery, which they recommend. It's so quiet and so tiny. Okay, let's check out the punch with this battery. Oh, it's got plenty. It's got plenty. Yeah, I think if you were to try 3S on this guy, it would be bonkers. Yeah, line of sight with this guy. It's tough, man. It's just so small. But, you know, I do the line of sight thing, you know, to see if we can hear any flutters with the tune and stuff like that. And really just to, you know, see how it sounds. And while over the sound of the cars, you can barely hear it at all, which is great. Heard a kind of a little bit of sort of prop wash oscillation, which I always expect when we've got these gaps in the arms. Now the baby ape doesn't have that, and this does. But yeah, it's definitely got the power for the size, for sure, you know, for freestyle and stuff. So I've no doubt it would carry that Runcam camera, even though, in my opinion, the quality out of that camera, very questionable. Remember the Mobius Mini? It's like years old, and I know it doesn't have like the gyro data or whatever, but I actually think the quality of that thing's better. Oh yeah, I'm loving this. It's a bit breezy today as well. You won't hear that over the audio because I'm using a very clever special microphone. It's not that clever. It's a lav mic. But yeah. I've flown in borderline gales and thought, this mic's never gonna pick it up, and then, oh, you can hear everything. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just having too much fun with it now. Yeah, the only thing that I can take away from the line of sight flight is that it's really quiet, but I am hearing just some slight prop wash oscillations, which you could fly through. You could fly through. Not hearing the props hitting the frame at the front, so that's good news. Make sure that your props are fully on properly. Staring right at me. Every time I do this, I try and get it close to the GoPro, and it feels like it's about, you know, 10 centimeters away, but the field of view on the GoPro is so wide that no. And I'm always looking for that thumbnail, and I never get it with these tiny micros. I think even if the blade was touching the camera, I wouldn't get it. Oh gosh, it is handling the wind really well. It is coming directly from behind, so it's not like a crosswind or anything, so easier for these power loops I like to do. Anyways, yeah, it looks like we're gonna get good flight time out of this. Don't feel it sagging at all, so yeah, pretty cool. Right, let's bring it in for a landing and do some FPV with it. Okie dokie, pig and a pokey. Believe it or not, it is about an hour later from the line of sight flight. I moved to our flying field and the sun decided to come out, which is fantastic because I can see if this thing suffers from jello, and it does not, and the image quality is super. Now what we do have, we always have it here because it's really open, is there is so much more wind, like 20 kilometers an hour plus, and then it's gusting too. Oh, I put it in a really stressful maneuver there, and yeah, it survived. Now that's downwind, and yeah, it's just disappearing downwind. Okay, we've got link quality 100. Yeah, there's some power lines over there, but yeah, when I turn around, we're on full power here, and yeah, it's pretty amazing, isn't it, for a 2.5 inch. We got too much space here. What happens if we go between the trees here? Now, I think you could get like a really decent flight time out of this, but if you're running the VTX at full power, then that is definitely going to shorten the flight time. Also, these batteries that I'm using, they are years old, so let's see. So we're at 33% throttle. Let's go full throttle. Yeah, we've got voltage sag. Let's do some stressy stuff. No wobbles, man, no wobbles. I'm impressed. On the line of sight flight, I kind of heard like prop wash oscillations. Can't hear anything but wind here. Big gusts. Don't know if my lav mic is gonna do the job here. We'll see. But the flight time's gonna be shorter anyways because I'm constantly fighting into the wind. Like, you know, 30% throttle. I just died down a little bit, but yeah. Oh, the camera is so much better. It is worth the extra money. It's just that question of whether, you know, Express LRS is mainstream enough for people to go for this. I mean, it's definitely the future. But I'm on a release candidate here. And, you know, they're saying, oh, you know, use the V1 of ELRS. You know, I didn't do any of that because, you know, I wanted to see what would happen. Man, yeah, this thing, I mean, if you're just going to go cruising, definitely do long range. Just the signal, just for me, is just, I mean, it's clear, but it's sort of, you can see that it's getting weaker on the video. I think that's because the linear antenna is kind of blocked by its own mount. It needs to be high up. If you want to do like long range and stuff like that, then it needs to be high up. Yeah, voltage sag into the 5s there. But man, I'm throwing the kitchen sink at this, and it keeps going. It's, you know, it's not just, I can't trick it out. Yeah, probably won't get the voltage sag that I'm getting. It hovers like, you know, 29% throttle. That's really good for 2S. 3S I think would be bonkers. Technically it does 3S, but yeah, I think 2S is fine. So what are we? With a 5-minute flight time, you get a 7-minute flight time with cruising and a decent battery and a calm day for sure. I really like this thing. It's fantastic. Right, that is my review of the DarwinFPV Tiny Ape. I'll put a link in the video description as well as a pinned comment if you wish to get one. And as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.